Right. Thanks, John. She can hear you. She can hear me. Well, I just want to do a little review. I've gotten a lot of feedback that people are tired of hearing from James because it's too relevant. They keep saying things like, you're preaching right to me. I got a 2-page note yesterday saying, this James stuff is getting pretty rough. And I said, I didn't write it. I'm just trying to preach it. Matt and I are just, what's that? Yeah, tell them to hold their tongue. And that really does work. So try that. Exactly. So I just wanted to remind you of some of the lessons that we've learned so far. I know it's been a couple weeks, but we started with quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. How's that going for y'all?
I had to use it this morning.
You had
drive up here.
Okay. And you just live a block away. So that should tell you something about Dunwoody traffic. I made the mistake yesterday of leaving my house and not going through the neighborhood to the light, just trying to turn left without that. And John Ray knows exactly what I'm talking about. Trying to get out of that neighborhood is an adventure, trying to turn left.
That's where I had to talk to myself.
Yes. So you need to go to the light. Remember that. Go to the light. Go to the light. And then Matt preached about seeing the image of God in others and how sometimes we get ourselves in trouble when we don't look at others as fully in the image of God. We look at people as less than ourselves. We show partiality. And that comes up over and over again. And then this past week was Hold Your Tongue. And if you weren't there at the contemporary service, the third graders really helped me preach that one. Jerry Ray helped me preach the 11:15 one. But the third graders were really a big help at the early service. We had 20 some get their third grade Bibles. And that's just a wonderful thing. And I know Tambourine would be glad to give you a third grader to pray for, or a third grader to ask them about what they're reading, if that's something that might be interested to you. And then this week is the evils of selfish envy and ambition. I remember an older pastor saying to me, young man, you are certainly ambitious. And I was like, I think the gospel calls for some level of drive. I think the gospel calls for some level of ambition. But the question that I always have to then ask myself, is it about me, or is it about what I'm trying to promote? Is it my selfish ambition, or is it about trying to promote the gospel? And I think we all have that balance that we have to live in between our own ambition and the ambition of something greater than ourselves. And then the text really is trying to tell us that the virtues of the wise create peace and not division. And if you see things that are creating division, those are probably things that are earthly wisdom. And it's fascinating to me that he sets up this dichotomy between earthly wisdom and wisdom from above, because I almost want to say there is wisdom from above and then the other is not wisdom. But the writer of James is kind of working that, and he's trying to say, it might also be wisdom, but it's not wisdom that brings unity. It's wisdom that brings division. It's wisdom that creates partiality, that puts someone above someone else. And so we move into the text. And I've put the text together in two different ways because I think I'm going to be preaching from the Message today. I don't know if some of you have become fans of the Message or not. Some people really dislike it. But for me, it puts it in such common English, better even than the Common English Bible, that it helps me to really get into the text and really help it become a part of me. And I love the new RSV. I've really got them put back in all the pews, and Matt and I tend to preach with new RSV, but and it does the best job with the Greek and the Hebrew, but sometimes it's a little thicker than the Message, which is right on point. So it begins with the question, and I just we got to among you, and then on the new RSV to say, "Too kind wisdom, friends." And he says, "Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness, born of wisdom." I talked to one of the older men in the church this week, and he said, "You should have given me that book, Anatomy of Peace, 30 years ago." He said, I would have done anything to have had that book, Anatomy of Peace, 30 years ago when I started my career. It would have kept me out of a lot of trouble. And then he said this, which I thought was strange. He said, but I feel like it's somewhat emasculated me. Isn't that interesting? He said, and so there's this sense that I have to be macho right in order to be a man, as opposed to somebody who can have a heart at peace and stand their ground and be assertive and not aggressive. Are y'all familiar with the difference in those two, or have I talked about that before? Assertiveness says, like Martin Luther did many years ago, here I stand, I can do no other. It's about self-definition. It's about knowing who you are and saying, this is who I am. And self-definition and assertiveness is really important. But I grew up with the idea that we ought to be aggressive, and aggressive gets into somebody else's space. Your own aggressiveness gets into someone else's space. And I think that what he is trying to learn in having a heart at peace, and it's not emasculating to know who you are and to assert that strongly. Does that make? But it can be over macho to get into someone else's space. And so James is talking about a gentleness born of wisdom. And sometimes the older we get and the more wisdom we require, we are able to rule with a gentle hand. I remember that great line from the leader of the band, Dan Fogelberg. You remember that guiding gentle hand that he talked about his father. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Sometimes we let our bitter envy get the best of us, and our own ambition about us. I was talking to my wife last night, and she said, and I may use this in my sermon Sunday, she said, you know, when they ask you that question in whatever class it's in, if you could pray for anything, if you could have anything in the world, what would you pray for? If you could pray for anything in the world, what would you pray for? And she said, my prayer is pretty simple. My prayer is simple enough. And she said, my prayer is that everyone would have enough. Not more than enough, but enough. That everyone would have enough. And is that possible in our world? So wisdom is God's gift of good works. Wisdom without works is dead. I know we've already heard James say faith without works is dead, but it's not really real wisdom unless it has legs, unless it's put into action. It's not enough to sit around and contemplate and think about how smart you are and how much wisdom you've accumulated over the years. Do you put that wisdom into practice? And then the new RSV, as I said, is a little tougher here. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and devilish. And I really like how David helped me with this the other day. He said, there are just really two categories that are being set up here. They're just kind of two items, and you can just start putting all the things that you do under, is this earthly? Is this devilish? Is this unspiritual? It really says sensual. Sensual is the probably another translation of the Greek. It uses the word sensual, where there is envy, selfish ambition, earthly, unspiritual, devilish. And so you start putting things like envy and selfish ambition under unspiritual and devilish, and all those things lead to disorder and wickedness. They don't lead to peace. But the wisdom from above, and there's kind of a list in here. First is pure, and then peaceable. Go back one slide. I'm still struggling through the RSV here. We'll get to the message. It's pretty clear. And that's the problem, once again, with James, is James is a little too clear for us, right? I mean, we just know what James is trying to say, and we just don't like it. But the wisdom from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. So that kind of gives it to you from the new RSV. And part of that allows you to keep it a little bit of a distance, because it's not words we use every day. So now let's try it with the message. All right. Live well, live wisely. Do you want to be counted wise, to build a reputation for wisdom? Here's what you do. Read those with me. Live well, live wisely, live humbly. You got it? Live well, live wisely, live humbly. It's the way you live, not the way that you talk, that counts. You might talk a good game, but do you play one? Mean-spirited ambition is the next line. The next, mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you are wise isn't wisdom. Twisting the truth to make yourselves sound wise isn't wisdom. I didn't get to it as much as I wanted to, and I did on the online version. But there's a man who writes for men, a fellow named Joe Martin, and he says we get in trouble with our tongues when we use our words to bend, to defend, to offend, and to pretend. And I added condescend because I've seen that a lot too. When we use our words to bend and to make ourselves sound wise when we perhaps are not, when we pretend that we are wiser than we are, when we have mean-spirited ambition that offends, and we try to defend our actions that are not of God. So mean-spirited ambition isn't wisdom. Boasting that you are wise isn't wisdom. It's the furthest thing from wisdom. It's animal cunning. It's devilish plotting. That's hard to get away from, isn't it? That's hard to get away. And then here, it just keeps getting better. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at each other's throats. You've seen it in families, you've seen it in business. I mean, you want to do the best that you can for your workplace, for your family, but when you're trying to get the better of others, it can be such a beautiful thing when you can find an elegant solution. They, in the midst of conflict, they say there are kind of 5 things that people do in conflict. Some people love confrontation. Who are you? Come on, tell the truth. Okay, a couple of y'all don't mind confrontation. Other people like compromise. And that means I convince you to do it my way. And it feels like compromise to you. Some people tend to accommodate. Some people tend to give in, and they just give in and they like to keep peace more than they like to win. You might be married to someone like that. Anybody? You know, they'd rather keep, nobody's married to anyone like that. So we tend to either accommodate, we tend to, and then some people tend to just not get into conflict because they need more information. So they tend to analyze instead of accommodate. Anybody is like, we can't talk about this now. I need more information. I need to do a little bit more research. And then finally, some people think compromise is the ultimate answer, but much of the work in conflict and negotiation talks about a twin win, a more elegant solution. And that's really what I always pray for. I always pray for a more elegant solution, something that I can't come up with on my own, something that only can happen if God intercedes. At my last church, I've told this story, we had a terrible old chapel that we needed to tear down. And we were building a new building. And in the midst of building that new building, I had people all over the community and in the church angry with me because we were tearing down a building that was full of mold and rodent feces and all sorts of other things. And it was not a healthy building to be in. And then someone said, this area where the offices are supposed to be in your new building, you could rebuild the chapel to scale in that building. And it was like a light came on and everybody won. We took everything from the chapel, we decontaminated it and built a chapel just like the old one until you walked in and there was green, beautiful green new carpet, and the old chapel had red carpet. And people would walk in and say, "This is beautiful," but the carpet's wrong. We have brand new carpet, and one of the families in the church paid to change the color. People are so set in their ways, aren't they? They like things a certain way, but it was a beautiful, elegant solution that God gave us to be able to honor the past and embrace the future. And that is a beautiful thing when that happens. And so I'm always praying, God, is there a more eloquent solution that I'm able to come up with my feeble brain? There's got to be something better. And that's always my prayer. Is there more an elegant solution? I learned that concept of an elegant solution, teaching people how to take the GMATs and the SATs. Any test takers here? Anybody love tests like me? Just Jonathan Sanders, maybe. Is there no other people who love standardized tests? Rob Wheeler, you're not a standardized. I mean, I just love standardized tests. And I love teaching people how to beat the standardized test. And many of those are set up for there to be an elegant solution that if you miss something, you're not going to get it. And so that's where that phrase comes from. A more elegant solution comes from me teaching people how to cheat the GMATs. So if you're thinking about taking the GMATs, I can't help you with the LSATs, but I can help you with the GMATs. I'd be glad to do that. Whenever you're trying to look better than others or get the better of others, things fall apart and everyone ends up at each other's throats. I'm sure you can think of a time that that's happened in your life. And then the message goes on. Real wisdom, God's wisdom, begins with a holy life and is characterized by getting along with others. It is gentle and reasonable, overflowing with mercy and blessings, and not hot one day and cold the next, not two-faced. That's one of the things that James is concerned about, is that we're two-faced, we're double-tongued, we're double-minded. He uses that kind of phrase over and over again. We are of two minds. We are not always thinking and integrated in our thinking. We don't have integrity in our minds. We don't have integrity. We're double-tongued. We don't have integrity in our tongues, and we don't have integrity with the way that we show one face and then the other. And then he says to us, you can develop a robust community. We've been talking about building community. You can develop, and how many of you have changed your picture on DCB? I mean, just, okay, if you haven't done that yet, Paul Roseman can show you how to do that on the way out. And he gets extra points if he gets everybody's picture in this group. Brian Mudderman gets extra points too. So change your picture. We can help you do that. You can develop a robust community that lives right with God and enjoys the results. And then this word is in italics in the text. I didn't add italics. This one is in italics in the text. And enjoy its results. And what's the word? Only if you do the hard work of getting along with each other, treating each other with dignity and honor. We need to do the hard work of getting along with each other, but it isn't easy. And that's why I say from James, these are simple lessons that call be overflowing with mercy and blessing. Turn and look at your neighbor. Just talk to yourself there on you with mercy blessings. Turn to you, please. Not yet is a good enough answer. No, not yet is a good enough answer. And everything okay? Okay, is somebody moving slides? Is somebody's back there? Okay, I was kind of concerned. Okay, but then there are these kind of two categories of wisdom. There's wisdom from above, and the wisdom from above is gentleness born of wisdom, pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. Wish that were true of us. We tend to live more on the right-hand side, earthly, unspiritual, devilish, bitter envy, selfish ambition, boastful, false to the truth. And this all leads to disorder and to wickedness. And so I want you to hear some earthly wisdom. Some of these remind me a little bit of Yogi Berra. If it weren't for electricity, we'd be watching TV by candlelight. Thomas Jefferson once said, the wise know too well their own weakness to assume infallibility. And he knows most, knows how little he knows. Amen. And then the next one, no one becomes wise who assumes he already is. No one becomes wise who assumes he already is. Years make a few people wise, but all of us old. And then this was a great story that I read as I was looking about wisdom. There was a pew on an island. There was a church on an island, and a special pew that two women were fighting about. And one said it was her pew, and the other said it was her pew. and they both laid claim to the pew. It got to be such a dispute that they took it to the governor of that island. And the governor said, fine, I will settle this. Whoever is older gets the pew. No one sat in the pew. Isn't that wonderful wisdom? And then the man who gives in when he is wrong is wise. The man who gives in when he is right is probably married. Can I get an amen? It's being recorded. Can you cut that little part? But diabolical wisdom, that's another way that this phrase is translated. Instead of devilish, diabolical. Diabolical wisdom creates discord. And St. Augustine talked about sin in this way. St. Augustine talked about sin as disease. And I like to think of it as dis-ease.
That's the first time I've seen that word that way. I saw dis-ease.
Dis-ease.
When I first looked at it.
Exactly. Discord, dis-ease. And Chris, this is really what Augustine is concerned about. He's saying that sin is not just a wrong moral act. We'd like to look to act that pointed, and if we can just be pure, this purity culture that says if we can just be pure and do all the right things, then we're people of God. But that is not what Augustine said. Our struggle is deeper within our core, and that's what James was telling us last week. Our struggle creates a dis-ease within us, and what we need to sin, what we need is a cure, a life-giving cure to our dis-ease. And so as you think about places in your life that give you dis-ease, do you have any places that give you dis-ease? That may be places where sin is taking hold. And that's why Wesley in the Holy Club, and I talked about a little bit in my online sermon, in Wesley's Holy Club, they had 22 questions that they asked one another. And one was a simple question: what have you thought, said, or done this week that you doubt whether or not it be a sin? What have you thought, said, or done this week that you doubt whether or not it would be a sin? And you would sit at a table like this with a small group of people in your class meeting or your Holy Club, and you would say, now I did this week. I can't decide whether this was over the line or not. Can you all help me? And it was a way that people grew and matured in their faith and helped them to get over their dis-ease. And so we're here to talk about not just the dis-ease, but also what are the fruits of wisdom? What are the fruits that come? And there's a great list of those things that are the fruits of the Spirit. You've heard the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and self-control. But these seem to be the fruits of wisdom. So there's another list in Galatians, the 5th chapter, if you need to go back and review that, about the fruits of the Spirit. And we're going to be talking about that in September. We're going to be preaching a series about taking root and bearing fruit, and how being deeply rooted helps us to bear fruit that makes a difference. But this is a different list. This is the fruits of wisdom. It's pure, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, willing to give other first shot, full of mercy and good fruits, and without trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And that was just the first few verses. The scripture text for Sunday has that part. Now it has the second part of the message. And now it's time to get serious. That was one of the few words I learned when we went to Greece when I was in college. I learned this negotiating term, solaripsu. Try it. It feels good. Solaripsu. That's like when you're in the marketplace and they say this thing is 10. It was drachma back then. They're on the euro now. But they'd say it's 10 drachma, and you would look at them and say, solaripsu, which means get serious. I had no idea if I was saying the right thing, but I could say in negotiation, get serious. Where do you think all the appalling wars and quarrel come from? Do you think they just happen? Think again. They come about because you want your own way. What does Paul say about love? It does not insist on its own way. It is not arrogant or rude, right? Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Do they just happen? Think again. They come about because you want your own way. And I love this line, and fight for it deep inside yourselves. James is concerned as much about the wars within us as the wars that we have with others. The wars within us for our selfish desires, our selfish ambition, they come about because you want your own way, and fight for it deep inside yourselves. And this is part of where I think I'm going with some of my preaching on Sunday, is it says you lust for what you don't have and are willing to kill to get it. Now, that's an extreme, isn't it? But I think that's what I mean, some of you lust for what you don't have and you're willing to kill trees and order it from Amazon to get even more boxes delivered to your house. Anybody have this happening? This is happening at my house. I don't even order anything and it keeps happening. But I'm killing these, left, right, with these boxes that just keep showing up at my house. You lust for what you don't have and are willing to kill to get it. You want what isn't yours and will risk violence to get it into your hands. You might not do that directly, but it may happen indirectly by some of the things that we do in our world. But I think it's also about an overreaction. And then finally, the new RSV says it this way: these conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? And you want something and do not have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. You hear how those cravings can get in our way. And I told Brian Muddiman I was going to use this Sunday. There are two kinds of people in this world: the kind of people who crave closure. Like that? Oh, that was pretty good. Just for what? It's like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. You understand? People who crave closure. And in response to that, we sometimes overreact. And I think that's something that happens to me as a man. I tend to overreact at times. I respond as the people from Spinal Tap said at volume 11, when it only needs to be volume 2. And that's something I have to work on myself. I have to work on responding at volume 2 when all that is required is volume 2, because I sometimes will go to volume 11. Mike Royko, a writer, said about the cravings at war within you: if you enjoy it, you can't eat it. If you don't like it, you can eat all you want. That's the answer to cravings. If you enjoy it, you can't have it. If you don't like it, you can have all you want. And then finally, the message goes on to say, you wouldn't think of just asking God for it, would you? Why not? Instead of letting your cravings take over and create wars within you and wars with others, why not ask God for what you need? And why not? Because you'll be asking for what you have no right to. You spoiled children, each wanting your own way. And then he says, finally, and going into verse 3, you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly in order to spend what you get on your pleasures. And I think Garth Brooks said it this way: sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Sometimes we pray for and ask for things that we don't need and shouldn't get. They wouldn't make us better. And then, it's fascinated. There are 4 texts they give us every week that Catholics and Presbyterians and Lutherans and Episcopalians, you may visit another church anywhere in the world and you may hear one of the 4 texts that we're preaching on, because we're on what's called the Revised Common Lectionary. And we're often preaching from the lectionary, not every week, but we're often preaching from the lectionary. So you could go visit a church in Arkansas even and hear the same, you could go to Saskatchewan. What's that?
Maybe not Arkansas.
Yeah, Episcopal Church in Arkansas, baby. But, wherever you might go, you'll be able to hear a similar word. And they skip pieces. And I always am interested in what gets left out, right? They have an agenda with leaving this out. And in the new RSV, it starts out, you adulterers. In the Message, it says you're cheating on God. If all you want is your own way, flirting with the world every chance you get, you end up enemies of God and his way. And do you suppose God doesn't care? The proverb has it that he's a fiercely jealous lover, and what he gives in love is far better than anything else you'll find. It's common knowledge that God goes against the willful proud. God gives grace to the willing humble, to live well, to live wisely, to live humbly. And so this is how it ends in the Message. So let God's work his will in you. Yellow and why make himself say yes to God, and God will be there in no time. And then finally, the lectionary quits before this last line in 4. Quit dabbling in sin, purify your inner life, quit playing the field, hit bottom and cry your eyes out. The fun and games are over. Get serious, really serious. Get down on your knees before your master. It's the only way you'll get on your feet. Isn't that beautiful? Get down on your knees before the master. It's the only way you'll get on your feet. I was sitting by the pool, I think it was Friday or Saturday, and I'd already had a long day. I think I had a funeral that day. I'd driven back and forth and I was already tired. And we had a bunch of people over at the house, and one of the little boys was there, and we had that game where you like throw the little golf balls and they spin around on these ladder golf. That's it, ladder golf. So they were playing that, and the little boy wanted to play, and what he really wanted to do was throw all the things into the pool. And then he got the bean bags, and he pretended to throw the bean bag, and then he chucked it right in the pool. And I yelled at it, and they're like, he's only 4. And I'm like, he planned this. This is not something he did by accident. He needs to be yelled at. But they were like, you responded at a volume 11. He's 4. You needed to respond at volume 4. Sometimes our tongues get the best of us. Sometimes we overreact. And therefore, as the new RSV finally says, submit yourself to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Emil Zatopek, the long-distance gold medalist, said, it's at the borders of pain and suffering that the men are separated from the boys. It's at the borders of pain and suffering that the men are separated from the boys. What will it take for all of us to mature? And these are the questions I ask you to talk about in your small groups. If you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? It's not a serious question. I just like that. How do you deal with your cravings? You put those up on the board. One more slide. Sorry. Keep going. Yeah, if you try to fail and succeed, which have you done? How do you deal with your cravings? What wisdom might you have for one who is controlled by their cravings? What would you tell them? What wisdom from God would you share? What wisdom from your life? How do you tell the difference between earthly wisdom and wisdom that's from above in today's world? I think there's a lot of shouting going on. Think about a time when you overreacted in recent days. What was the real cause of it? What was the real cause of it? And, I think part of the reason that I overreacted is I was that boy. I was that boy. But I also think I overreacted because I was tired. And then finally, how do you draw near to God? What is your practice to seek to draw near to God to deal with your disease? Thank you for listening to James. I hope you continue to find him annoyingly helpful.